What does true equality actually mean?
It sounds like such a simple question, doesn't it?
It does, but that one question, it's like an intellectual fault line running right beneath all of Western political and social thought. Is equality just the simple demand that we treat everyone exactly the same? No exceptions, just pure uniformity.
Or is it something much more complex? A request that we treat people according to what they deserve based on their merit, maybe, or their need, or their role in society?
And that split,
Yeah.
that dichotomy, is ancient. But the fight over how to interpret it is at the very core of every single modern policy debate, from how we handle taxes to how we fund education.
For millennia, thinkers have been struggling with this. Is equality about uniformity, or is it about proportionality? And the way we answer that single question, it dictates everything. Our justice system, our economic policies, everything.
It's not just semantics, it's the literal architecture of our social structures.
It really is.
So, our mission today is a true deep dive into this exact problem. We've been immersed in a really comprehensive analysis from the Syntopicon, a landmark summary of the great books, and we're focused specifically on the topic of equality.
And this book uses these rigorous Adlerian principles to track the concept from classical times through the medieval period and all the way to the modern arguments over economic justice.
It's basically a master key to the whole Western intellectual tradition. It doesn't just give you summaries.
No, it classifies, it analyzes, and it traces the interconnected path of these major ideas across history. And the book argues that if you don't grasp the foundational split between the two great classical minds, Plato and Aristotle, you will never truly understand the frameworks we use to evaluate claims of equality today.
It gives you the historical and ethical tools you need for genuinely critical thinking on what can be a really explosive topic.
And as we navigate this dense philosophical landscape, it's worth noting.
Right. You're experiencing a unique two-voice AI conversation, powered by Google's Notebook LM, for deeper, more dynamic book analysis.
It allows us to go deeper into these connections.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start right at the beginning. We need to define the terms of the debate with the two philosophers who created the templates, really, for all the discourse that followed.
Plato and Aristotle.
The two great classical minds.
So the book positions Plato as the originator of the metaphysical and transcendent ideal of equality.
Metaphysical, meaning beyond the physical world.
Exactly. It's so crucial to understand that for Plato, equality is not primarily an empirical concept. It's not something you can measure or observe out in the world.
It exists truly in the ideal realm of the forms, a perfect, unchanging standard. That's such a critical starting point because it immediately places equality beyond the reach of, say, human policy or even human nature.
Right. When we talk about the forms, we're talking about these perfect, unchanging templates. The form of justice, the form of beauty.
A form of the good.
The form of the good. And Plato applies this exact logic to equality itself. Our physical world is just full of unequal, transient, and imperfect copies.
So his core principle then centers on the soul's equality before the good.
That's it. All human souls, it doesn't matter what their earthly station is, their physical abilities, their wealth, their job, they are all equally subject to the pursuit of the ultimate form of the good.
So this is equality viewed from the vantage point of eternity. It's asking us to look past all the observable differences that define our day-to-day lives.
It is a completely different perspective.
But I have to push back on that just for a moment. If all souls are fundamentally equal in dignity, why does Plato's ideal society in the Republic demand such a rigid, unequal social structure? You have the philosopher kings at the top, then the guardians, then the laborers, each in these very unequal roles.
And that is the key tension Plato introduces. It's why his view is so complex and so enduring. That inequality you see, the class stratification, is purely functional. It's necessary for cosmic order. It is not an inherent reflection of a soul's worth.
So the laborer's soul is equal to the philosopher king's soul in its intrinsic value.
And in its potential to grasp truth. But the laborer's function is necessary for the survival of the whole state.
Ah, okay. So if the philosopher king's role is to govern with wisdom, and the laborer's role is to produce goods, the inequality is in the task, not the person.
Precisely. And this leads him directly to his definition of justice. For Plato, justice is achieved not when everyone gets an identical share of resources. Material parity is completely irrelevant to him, but when each person fulfills their proper functional role in a harmonious society.
A role that's aligned with their inherent spiritual nature.
Yes. It's all about spiritual alignment and functional necessity. The system is ordered by this necessity, but the souls within that order are fundamentally equal in their capacity for truth and their subjection to the good.
So this establishes equality as a kind of internal ideal state, something necessary for both cosmic and civic order. Plato demands that equality must be more than just material stuff. It has to be rooted in some higher, non-physical reality that transcends circumstance. He gives us the aspirational ideal.
He does. And then when we turn to Aristotle, we get the powerful counterpoint. His view is so much more grounded in the real world of politics and law.
This is where things get really interesting.
He defines equality in teleological and immanent terms.
Okay, let's break that down. Teleological means focused on the purpose, the end goal, the telos.
Right. And immanent means it's focused on the practical, observable reality right here, inside the polis, the city-state.
And this is where we get the idea that fairness is immediately linked to merit, not uniformity. Aristotle wasn't concerned with the metaphysical equality of souls before some abstract good.
Not at all. He was concerned with the practical, sustainable management of resources, duties, and honors among citizens who are actually living together right now.
His core principle, then, which governs all his discussions on justice, is equality as proportionality.
Proportionality. This means treatment must be proportional to the individuals involved. It is equal treatment for equals, and this is the philosophical earthquake that separates him from modern egalitarianism. Unequal treatment for unequals.
Let's try to ground that in a practical example. Say we're distributing honors in the military. General A commanded a decisive victory, and General B lost a minor skirmish. To treat them equally, to give them both the same award, would be a profound injustice in Aristotle's view.
It absolutely would be, because the relevant merit and function are unequal. For Aristotle, to treat the unequally meritorious as if they were identical is to violate distributive justice.
And distributive justice says that goods, honors, burdens, they all have to be distributed proportionally to the contribution or the virtue of the person receiving them.
And it has to be relevant to the good being distributed. His famous example is flutes. Who should get the best flutes in the city?
The best flute players.
Not the richest citizens, not the most noble citizens, but the best flute players, because the purpose of a flute is to be played well. Merit is tied to function.
So the application of Aristotle's definition is rooted entirely in the nature and function of individuals within society. The role of a university professor requires deep research and teaching excellence.
So only those demonstrating that merit should be treated as equal candidates for the salary and status that come with that role. It's a very practical model for running a functional state because it ties reward directly to utility and excellence.
But it has a danger.
It does. It requires a clear, agreed-upon definition of what constitutes merit and who counts as an equal. And historically, those definitions are often created by the powerful to exclude others.
This synthesis connection is so vital. We have these two co-equal, constantly competing origin points for all subsequent Western discourse.
On one side, Plato. He gives us the ideal, the metaphysical demand for spiritual sameness. He insists we look beyond the material at intrinsic worth.
On the other, Aristotle. He gives us the proportional, practical demand for fairness based on merit and function, demanding justice and distribution according to what people deserve.
And every single debate that follows is essentially trying to reconcile or choose between those two powerful and often mutually exclusive frameworks.
So as we move on from the classical era, which was so concerned with the polis, the city-state,
Right.
into the medieval period, the intellectual challenge changes completely. The question isn't just how to run a city, but how to structure a massive empire or a universal church.
And that structure has to honor both the spiritual ideal and the practical necessity of a massive stratified social hierarchy. It's a huge problem.
The medieval thinkers, especially someone like Augustine in the early period and then Thomas Aquinas later, they could just pick one. They couldn't just say, we're with Plato or we're with Aristotle.
No, they needed a philosophical foundation that could accommodate both. They needed the universal, transcendent promise of the new Christian faith.
And the practical hierarchical reality of feudal society.
The answer was synthesis. They brilliantly blended Platonic metaphysics, that transcendent world of ideal forms, and applied a divine theological stamp to it. But at the same time, they used Aristotelian practical reason to structure the earthly, political, and social world.
Okay, let's break down that mechanism. How does grounding equality in divine order and natural law actually work?
Well, they hold that Platonic ideal of spiritual equality firm. all individuals are equally created in the image of God. They're all equally subjects of divine providence and equally recipients of the promise of salvation or damnation.
So that spiritual equality is absolutely guaranteed by the Creator. That's the universal grounding for human dignity. It handles Plato's demand for intrinsic worth.
It does, but as you can imagine, this guaranteed spiritual equality did not translate into material or political equality in feudal Europe.
No, not at all. You still had kings, lords, peasants, a whole church hierarchy.
Correct. And that social order, that stratification, that proportionality they observed on Earth is ultimately considered a reflection of God's perfect ordered plan. It's natural law.
So Aquinas, in particular, he adapted Aristotle's ideas of functional justice, but he ran it through the lens of this natural law.
Yes. Inequality in status is seen as a divinely sanctioned functional difference. The king has the function of ruling, the peasant has the function of laboring. Each is fulfilling their part in a divine cosmic order.
That is a remarkable achievement in synthesis. It provides a theological guarantee for the concept of equality, making it universally applicable across all of humanity, far beyond any city or cultural boundary.
It elevates equality to the universal human condition, but at the same time, it justifies these fixed social orders. It argues that the inequality you see in status is just a necessary functional difference that reflects a greater divine proportionality.
So we've moved from Plato's ideal forms to a divine natural law, but that essential tension remains. Spiritual equality on one hand and a practical functional hierarchy on the other.
It's the same core problem, just in a new theological container.
Which brings us to the Enlightenment. If the medieval period gave equality a divine guarantee, the Enlightenment, starting around the 17th century, it basically rips away that divine guarantee.
It does. It replaces it with a secular human political demand. This is the paradigm change. The focus shifts dramatically from divine or church authority to individual autonomy and man-made social structures.
That shift is just seismic. You have key figures like John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau who fundamentally altered the language of equality. They kept the universal scope they inherited from the medieval thinkers.
But their focus moved entirely away from a divine hierarchy. Instead, they focused on the intrinsic, self-evident value of the individual in a theoretical state of nature, and then the social contracts that form society.
They're still influenced by both classical traditions, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. The ideal of universal dignity still echoes Plato's concern for intrinsic worth. And the focus on social contracts and laws is a practical structure, which echoes Aristotle's concern for order and distribution. But their core concepts now revolve around innate, unalienable, universal rights.
Locke argued, for example, that in the state of nature, all men are in a state of perfect freedom to order their actions, without asking leave or depending upon the will of any other man.
And that is the foundational idea of equality of liberty. It's a demand for non-interference from others.
And this is where the Syntopicon summary notes the definitive break. Equality stops being about fulfilling a divinely prescribed role, like in the medieval world.
Or about contributing proportionally to the good of the polis, like for Aristotle. It now becomes a precondition for any legitimate government. Individuals are born with certain rights, and they only enter into a social contract to protect those rights.
Which means the state is now obligated to ensure legal equality for all citizens, irrespective of their merit, their religious standing, or their prescribed economic role.
And this is the moment in history that is most relevant to you, the modern listener. This is the birth of documents like the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights.
The idea of all people are created equal gets enshrined in constitutional documents. Equality transforms from a philosophical or theological aspiration into a legal, political demand.
Yes, a demand for equal treatment under the law. But the question is no longer whether we are equal, but whether the state is functioning justly if it allows vast material inequality to exist, even when legal rights are formally equal.
And that sets the stage perfectly for the modern tension we face today. How much state intervention is necessary to realize these universal rights in practice, especially when we see such massive disparities in economic capacity.
That's the whole game now.
We've just covered 2.5 millennia of thought in deep detail, moving from ideal forms to the rule of law. That is dense material, and I think it demands a moment of reflection.
Absolutely. The goal here isn't just speed, it's thorough understanding. We encourage critical thinking, which is why you should check out Mindful Moments, our YouTube channel. It offers AI, book analysis, summaries, and critiques, all designed to inspire reflection and rational thought.
Nourish your mind with deep analysis by exploring those critiques. Now let's see what happens to equality when democracy, mass society, and competitive capitalism enter the conversation.
And the philosophical debate shifts from what equality is to how you actually achieve it amidst radical economic difference.
This is where it gets very real.
The transition into the 19th and 20th centuries forces philosophy to reckon with the practical realities of industrial capitalism and democratic governance.
Because when the Enlightenment guaranteed equal legal rights, that was a powerful abstraction. But the economic realities, the factory floor, tenement housing, cycles of inherited wealth, it made it brutally clear that equal rights in a courtroom didn't guarantee equal life chances outside of it.
Exactly. The modern world discovered that perfect legal equality could coexist with massive economic disparity and social stratification. People could have the legal right to start a business, but if they had no capital, no education, no health insurance.
That right remains purely theoretical. It's an empty promise. So the modern debate is fundamentally a reckoning with this gap between the theory and the reality.
And the central tension of the last century has really crystallized into this debate between equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome.
Okay, opportunity versus outcome. Let's define those. Opportunity suggests a fair starting line. Everyone has the chance to compete based on their abilities with minimal structural barriers.
Which is very Aristotelian, right? It's focused on proportional reward for effort and merit.
Right. But then equality of outcome suggests a fair result. It argues that societal structures should intervene to ensure that the results are roughly similar, regardless of starting point or even individual effort.
And that's often based on the recognition that social and historical barriers make the starting line fundamentally unequal to begin with. It's a much more Platonic idea, striving toward an ideal, ordered state of social harmony and some level of material parity.
This tension is so powerful because it just resurrects the Plato-Aristotle divide, but it applies it to wealth and resources.
It does. It asks, does the ideal of a society where everyone lives a good life, the Platonic ideal, outweigh the practical proportional demand that those who merit more should receive more, the Aristotelian meritocracy?
And what responsibility does the state have to guarantee not just abstract rights, but the tangible conditions for a flourishing life?
That is the modern question.
The book highlights two key figures who really defined this modern battlefield in the late 20th century, John Rawls and Robert Nozick. Their disagreement is maybe the most significant philosophical conflict in modern political economy.
It's hard to overstate their importance. Rawls, in his theory of justice, focuses heavily on equality of opportunity and fairness. His work implicitly connects back to Aristotelian proportionality, but with an incredibly crucial caveat.
He asks us to imagine a society from behind what he calls the veil of ignorance. Let's spend some time on the veil of ignorance, because this is the mechanism Rawls uses to get to genuinely fair opportunity. You, the listener, have to imagine designing a society without knowing who you will be in it.
You don't know your gender, your race, your wealth, your intelligence, your family status, nothing. You're designing a system assuming that you might end up being the poorest, least advantaged member of that society.
Exactly. And Rawls argues that from behind this veil, any rational person would choose a society that maximizes liberty for all. But, and this is the key, they would also institute a system where inequalities are only justified if they benefit the least advantaged members of society.
That's his famous difference principle.
So Rawls keeps proportionality and merit. A doctor can still earn more than a cleaner, but that's only allowed so long as that system, the higher pay for the doctor, which incentivizes the work, serves to lift the floor for the least advantaged, maybe through taxes that fund public services.
Right. It means opportunity must be truly equal, which requires state action, funding public education, providing universal health care, social safety nets, all to ensure the starting line is genuinely fair for everyone, including the person behind the veil who turns out to be disadvantaged.
It's proportionality, but tempered by an ideal of social responsibility. He's striving for a Platonic ideal state of fairness.
It's a very nuanced interpretation of justice. It respects individual effort, but rejects the idea that a purely meritocratic system, unconstrained by fairness to the poorest, could ever lead to a just or stable society. The state must actively shape the basic structure of society to make it fair.
And then you have the strong, powerful counterpoint from Robert Nozick in Anarchy, State, and Utopia.
The other side of the coin.
Completely. Nozick focused intensely on individual liberty and minimal state intervention. He argued forcefully against any attempts to enforce outcomes or even to correct imbalances created by historical injustice.
For Nozick, the individual right is paramount. His theory of entitlement is based on three tenets: justice in acquisition, which is how resources are initially claimed,
Justice and transfer, which is how resources are voluntarily moved between people.
and justice in rectification, for correcting past injustices like theft.
And the crucial point here is that for Nozick, if property was acquired justly and transferred justly, then any resulting distribution is just, no matter how unequal it is, no matter how wide the gap between the richest and the poorest becomes.
If it happened through voluntary choices, it's just. Full stop. So any state interference designed to enforce a specific patterned outcome, like Rawls' difference principle, is seen by Nozick as a violation of fundamental individual rights.
He essentially views it as forcing some citizens to work for the benefit of others.
He does. He famously argues that taxation for redistributive purposes is morally equivalent to forced labor, a violation of the most basic right to ownership of your own self and your own labor.
The synthesis connection here is so vital. These modern arguments are constantly referencing the classical ideas. Rawls wants fairness and proportional systems, but he wants to realize a broad, ideal state of opportunity by using the state's power.
That's Plato's ideal state via Aristotle's proportionality.
And Nozick champions the ultimate individual liberty that was established during the Enlightenment, pushing back fiercely against any form of proportional justice that requires state coercion. It's pure liberty.
And this raises the important question the book suggests is the philosophical core of modern political discourse. Can true liberty even exist without some baseline of economic parity?
If a system offers purely theoretical opportunity, but denies people the resources necessary to actually seize it, has the state fulfilled its obligation to the ideal of equality?
That unresolved tension between the Platonic ideal outcome and the Aristotelian just process ensures the debate continues to rage across every democratic and capitalist society.
So we've traced the history, and we understand the central tension points: metaphysical versus proportional, opportunity versus outcome. But when someone makes a claim about equality, say, arguing for a policy like universal basic income or a flat tax, how do we, as informed listeners, actually evaluate that claim?
How do we move past the rhetoric and the political shouting? This is precisely the purpose of the Adlerian critique framework, which is the methodology the book summary uses. Its primary purpose is to filter out ideological noise and focus on what is logically and philosophically sound.
It's like a rigorous grading rubric for philosophical claims. It forces assertions out of the realm of emotion or dogma and into the hard light of logic and evidence.
Right. The methodology dictates that all claims about equality must be systematically mapped to evidence and then tested against multiple validity checks. The goal isn't necessarily to prove a policy right or wrong.
What is it then?
It's to understand its intellectual weight and consistency. Does the person making the claim truly understand the historical and philosophical tradition they're invoking? Or are they just repeating a soundbite? The framework gives you the tools to discern that fundamental difference.
Okay, so the first critical step in this framework is classifying the quality of the claim itself. The Adlerian system uses a distinct hierarchy of evidence, ascending in value. Let's walk through the four classifications. We can use a continuous example. Let's take the claim that the modern system of resource distribution is unfair.
Good idea. At the bottom, we have number 1, opinion. This is the least valuable form of evidence. An opinion is just a statement of personal preference, belief, or unverified assertion.
So someone's saying the system is unfair because I feel it's unfair, or the rich are just greedy.
Exactly. That carries subjective weight but lacks any objective proof or reasoned structure. In a political debate, most of the shouting falls into this category.
Okay, moving up, we get to number 2, knowledge.
Knowledge is verifiable fact. Raw data, statistics, historical dates, establish scientific truths. If you say, according to the Federal Reserve, the top 1% of Americans own 35% of the total national wealth, that is knowledge.
It provides necessary grounding, it's verifiable, but on its own it doesn't explain why that's the case or what should be done about it.
Which brings us to number 3, understanding. Understanding is knowledge plus context. This requires explaining the causes, the implications, and the underlying relationships of the facts.
So we have to move beyond the raw data of the wealth gap to understand the historical, structural, and policy reasons why that gap exists.
Yes. We have to analyze how Locke's ideas of property rights, combined with specific tax policies and the effects of globalization, created that 35% disparity. This is where real philosophical analysis begins, connecting the dots between classical principles and modern realities.
And finally, at the top, we have number 4, wisdom.
Wisdom is the highest philosophical goal. It's understanding combined with sound judgment, and it's focused on the practical application of principles toward a desirable ethical end.
So it asks, given our deep understanding of the causes and historical trajectories, what is the best ethical and practical course of action to achieve a sustainable balance between justice and liberty?
Precisely. True analysis seeks to elevate claims beyond mere opinion, demanding deep understanding and ultimately philosophical wisdom to guide our actions.
Okay, so once a claim has been mapped onto that evidence hierarchy, and hopefully it's at the level of understanding or wisdom, it's then subjected to three rigorous tests of validity.
This is how we ensure intellectual rigor and prevent ideological enthusiasm from substituting for rational thought. The first test is coherence.
An internal logic test. Does the equality claim contradict itself?
Right. For example, consider a policy proponent who argues passionately that the state should enforce absolute material equality in distribution.
Okay.
But then they also insist that all individuals must retain absolute freedom in their economic activity.
Well, absolute economic freedom inevitably leads to unequal accumulation of wealth.
So the claim for absolute equality fails the coherence test. The internal parts of the argument logically oppose each other.
Makes sense. The second test is correspondence.
This is the external reality check. Does the claim match observable facts or historical context? If an argument for a pure meritocracy completely ignores the documented historical legacy of systemic discrimination, racial exclusion, or inherited privilege, it fails the correspondence test.
It's a philosophy that doesn't accurately reflect the real-world conditions it's trying to regulate. It has to align with how the world actually works.
And the third test is pragmatic validity. This is the practical test. Does the claim work in practice, or does it lead to desirable outcomes?
A lot of claims can sound beautiful in theory.
Like a system where no one can own more than 10 times the income of the poorest person. Sounds nice. But when applied, it might result in unintended negative consequences, like capital flight, economic stagnation, or even tyranny.
So a theory of equality that results in social breakdown or fails to achieve its stated economic goals, no matter how pure its intentions, fails the pragmatic test.
So we have a robust checklist, 4 levels of evidence, 3 tests of validity. It's designed to filter out noise, identify intellectual gaps, and focus on real, rigorous insights. This framework helps you, the listener, dissect complex political and economic claims with the precision of a philosopher.
But beyond logic and reality checks, the Adlerian framework demands a crucial ethical evaluation. It's not just about what's logical, it's about what's right.
Yes, ensuring that even the most rigorous analysis is grounded in fundamental human respect. And the most crucial ethical test here is the application of the Golden Rule.
The Golden Rule test. It insists that ethical judgments about equality must uphold reciprocity and respect for human dignity.
This is particularly vital when you're dealing with those Aristotelian proportional claims, which can so easily be warped to rationalize the privilege of the powerful. If you propose a principle of inequality, say unequal taxation or unequal access to resources based on some functional difference, you have to pass this test.
And it requires asking, would this principle be acceptable if the roles were reversed? If you propose a system that benefits your group at the expense of another, would you still accept that system if you were randomly assigned to be born into that other disadvantaged group?
It's a mechanism for achieving the intellectual detachment that Rawls required with his veil of ignorance, but applied on an ethical level.
This simple, powerful test ensures that principles of equality are not just self-serving rationalizations, but are universally sustainable and rooted in mutual respect.
It forces the thinker back toward that Platonic idea of the inherent worth and dignity of the soul, regardless of earthly circumstance.
And finally, the Adlerian critique demands a civic evaluation. All philosophically sound claims are then evaluated against the constitutional aims and practical goals of the state.
This step ensures that the discussion remains grounded in practical governance. It asks, does this theory of equality actually help us achieve a more perfect union, promote general welfare, or secure the blessings of liberty for all?
So this final step makes sure that the rigorous philosophical discussion ultimately serves the civic mission of improving human governance and the lives of citizens within a defined political structure.
It brings it all back home.
We have completed a pretty comprehensive journey. We've traced the concept of equality across 2.5 millennia, providing you with the necessary historical context to engage with this topic on a much deeper level.
We began with the metaphysical ideal of spiritual equality and intrinsic worth from Plato, and the constant counter-demand for practical, proportional justice based on merit from Aristotle.
That dual origin was synthesized by medieval thinkers through the concept of divine order, which eventually gave way to the Enlightenment's demand for universal legal rights and the social contract.
And this culminated in the modern debates, where the legal equality guaranteed by the Enlightenment collided head-on with the economic realities of capitalism. This led to that intense philosophical conflict over equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome, best represented by the clash between Rawls and Nozick.
And we showed you that the Adlerian critique offers the concrete tools we need to analyze these complex, long-running debates rationally. It ensures we move beyond mere opinion by applying rigorous tests of coherence, correspondence, and pragmatic validity.
All while holding the golden rule as our ethical standard.
The book subtly implies that until we can reconcile Plato's demand for the equality of souls, the intrinsic dignity of every single human being, with Aristotle's demand for proportional justice, the necessary recognition of functional difference and merit, this debate will never truly end.
It's the central conflict.
So what stands out to you as the most difficult aspect of that reconciliation? The equal soul or the unequal merit?
A question to ponder.
Click the link on screen for the in-depth book summary. Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go.